Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show. Today I've got Matthew and Razi with me. Razi is back from traveling the world. He's weary and dust-ridden, just off a plane from LA, I think. So he'll chip in a little bit, but I think he's quite tired. The topics we're going to be talking about today primarily is surrounding the media attitude towards Israel, and particularly the kind of bias towards Israel. The main topic we're starting with is an interview that was done on Sky News today, or yesterday rather. For people who don't know Sky News particularly, it's a news network owned by Rupert Murdoch, which would typically mean it kind of leans to the right. It means they'd be sympathetic towards. Interestingly, we've seen some very harsh criticism of Israeli representatives coming from Sky News. So we're going to start with this interview that was done surrounding the hostage deal, which has been going on and which we've been talking about for the last few days on the channel. I believe Daniel's got a video of the interview for us, which we're going to start by watching. Is that ready, Daniel?
I was speaking to a hostage negotiator this morning. He made the comparison between the 50 hostages that Hamas has promised to release, as opposed to the 150 prisoners that are Palestinians that Israel has said that it will release. And he made the comparison between the numbers and the fact that does Israel not think that Palestinian lives are valued as highly as Israeli lives?
That is an astonishing accusation. If we could release one prisoner for every one hostage, we would obviously do that. We're operating in horrific circumstances. We're not choosing to release these prisoners who have blood on their hands. We are talking about people who have been convicted of stabbing and shooting attacks. Notice the question of proportionality doesn't interest Palestinian supporters when they are able to get more of their prisoners out. But really, it is outrageous to suggest that the fact that we are willing to release prisoners who are convicted of terrorism offenses, more of them than we are getting our own innocent children back, somehow suggests that we don't care about Palestinian lives. Really, that's a disgusting accusation.
So there you go. It's only only a minute of the coverage which is going on constantly from Sky News and which is very critical towards Israel. Even though it's only a minute, I have quite a lot to say about that. But Matthew and Razi, I'll just hear, what did you guys think of that, just seeing it off the cuff?
Was that to me or to Razi? Sorry.
Whichever of you want to go.
You can go first, and I'll try to calm down by the time you're done.
Well, it seems a completely bizarre take on its own terms, because surely the Hamas has actually got a better deal out of it, if anything.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so no, go on. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but yes.
And as for why Kay Burley has chosen to put the question in that way, obviously I can't speak for her. To be completely fair, I guess it is part of a news journalist's job to put questions in a challenging way when they're interviewing people. However, it seems a bit of a very strange, unnecessarily challenging way to put it in these circumstances, I would say.
Razi, do you want me to? Have you calmed down enough yet, or do you want me to
go? No, but maybe I shouldn't talk about this one calm. Yeah. So first of all, Matthew, I don't think journalists always have to ask questions that that make the person uncomfortable. You're trying to get information, and or trying to in some cases have a conversation with the person. It doesn't always have to be hostile. It seems like it always has to be hostile, because that's how Israelis are being interviewed in British media, certainly. Yeah, these people are really grasping at straws. I mean, I'm waiting for the journalist who's going to ask why Israeli babies like put their blood all over the knives of innocent Palestinians. I mean, this is really next level. The demand for hostages. Israel would, of course, ideally release zero hostages, zero prisoners in exchange for hostages. So, but yeah, the conversation, I mean, Kay Burley took it to the next level. But the whole conversation about this, this exchange, it is terrorists that Israel is releasing in exchange for innocent civilians. So their lives really are worth nothing, and they shouldn't be alive. Yeah, it's a shame that the media is actively working with the terrorists here, as they have been from October 7th.
Yeah, my reaction is kind of to her, to Kay Burley, but also to the Israeli guy. So from her, I agree with you, Matthew, exactly that it's a bizarre thing to say. And she seems to have heard it from this hostage negotiator, whoever, and thought it was quite a good point. But Israel is disadvantaged in the deal. They're having to give up more prisoners in effect to get more hostages back. And so it's Hamas in that sense who are holding the upper hand in the negotiations. And they also had to build in this awful proviso that for every additional 10 hostages that Hamas releases, they'll extend the ceasefire for another day. So this is a deal which is completely to Hamas's advantage. And so the idea that she could hear about that and think, oh, this actually is evidence of how cruel and spiteful and nasty the Israelis are, is just bizarre. But then also to the guy's reaction, one, it's very good that he's sort of indignant and self-righteous about, how dare you kind of be so disrespectful about this. So that's good. But then he says what he's outraged about is the suggestion that Israel doesn't care about Palestinian lives. Now, it's clear that Israel does care about Palestinian lives in the sense that they prioritize them too much over their own people, over their own soldiers to some extent, although that's not the criticism coming from the international community. From the objectivist perspective, that is what they're doing too much of. So that's also kind of unusual on the one hand as well. But what's lacking from Kay Burley, I guess, and something that's really important, is any kind of perspective on what government is for. So why? So from the objective perspective, what is government for? It's for the protection of their own citizens. It's to protect their rights and liberties. So therefore, you do value your own citizens' lives far more than the other side's citizens in a war. So in this case, the Israeli government should value the lives of the Israeli citizens far more than the lives of Palestinian citizens. And that's the implicit act that happens every day when the IDF thinks civilian casualties are justifiable, which, fair enough. They feel that in killing Hamas soldiers or leaders or whatever, if Palestinian citizens get caught up in that, it's justifiable because they value protecting the lives of Israeli citizens even more. And that's something that, if you look at the journalists who are interviewing Israeli representatives from Sky News or a lot of the British media, they're bereft of any kind of view of what government's for or how it should act, and yet are criticizing Israel based on premises on views which are derived from a view of what the government should be doing and what it's there for, and so on and so forth. So that's what I think is really awful about this. Not only that she's kind of rude, but that she's clearly just very clueless. And so that is what I think is really terrible. And you see a lot of this kind of going on. There was another guy who is Hamas's unofficial ambassador to the UK. His name's Hassam Zumlot. And we're going to be talking later in the show about a man called Mark Regev, who used to be Israel's ambassador to the UK. And I kind of want to contrast how they're treated. So Hassam Zumlot, of course, is not the official ambassador because Gaza isn't really recognized as a state which could have an official ambassador in the UK. But he gets interviewed on the news. He's interviewed on prestigious leading podcasts. He was interviewed on the podcast The Rest is Politics, which is hosted by Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, influential kind of political figures. He was also interviewed at the Labour Party conference on stage, at which it was reported that he basically said that Israel was asking for it. And he's not treated as this pariah who needs to get kind of hounded out. Even when he was kind of given hardball treatment by journalists, he was basically able to pirouette around them and make it out that Gaza were the victims in all this and the Israelis were the nasty perpetrators. So what kind of more broadly, I think, his treatment, but also the behavior of Kay Burley here is kind of indicating, is that they're completely unprepared with any kind of philosophical view about what the nature of government is or for, or how you would actually criticize the Gazan side and kind of hold them to account. And that's what's really kind of showing from this interview, I think. Matthew, did you have any additional thoughts on this one?
Well, just I think you're right, certainly, and it does seem to me that there is across all the British news channels a sort of bias, particularly on the Israeli-Gaza conflict and how it's being reported, and that I don't think Israel are actually getting a fair shot anywhere out there.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And so, Raz, so I think this is motivated in part just by cluelessness. Like, they don't have a view about what government is for. Like, the idea that she can ask, does the Israeli government, and say it as a negative thing, does the Israeli government value the life of Israeli citizens more? Like, this is just like, it's partly motivated by cluelessness, but I think there has to be like an element of malice in here as well. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, the problem when you say that people are clueless when they express evil views is you let them off the hook, basically, morally. I think Kay Burley has been around for long enough. I've been, watching her on Sky News for probably 20 years or so. I've been annoyed by her the whole time, mostly from the, girl power stuff, but this is next level. So yeah, I think she knows what she's doing. And yeah, you mentioned the Hamas spokesperson. I don't even know why they need one. They have the British media. And you said that he said something to the effect of Israel was asking for it. Well, that's what the head of the UN said. He said this didn't happen in a vacuum, which basically meant it's Israel's fault. So yeah, the job of the Israeli spokespeople is so difficult. Like, I don't know how you talk to somebody like Kay Burley. Period. Like, I don't know how to do something like that. And I think the best part of Elon Levy's response there was the facial expression. It said it all. Everything after that was just like there was no point. Yeah, and of course, as part of this deal, there is a ceasefire that's going to last, somewhere between 4 and I don't remember how many days. And I was telling Daniel earlier, we can pre-record an episode about how Hamas violated the ceasefire. That's what they do, and of course we can also pre-record an episode about how the British media reported Israel's response to Hamas breaking the ceasefire rather than the breaking of the ceasefire. Unfortunately, this is what we have as the news media here in the UK.
Yeah. Just on the ceasefire. So yeah, it's going to be 4 days. There was confusion about when it was going to start. The IDF has said it was going to start today at 10 o'clock. It's actually going to start, I think it's 7 o'clock tomorrow, according to Qatar. And as I said, it could go on. So for every 10 hostages, they're going to extend it by a day. So since there's 240 hostages, if they're releasing 50,
I think they limited it to 100, right? 100 hostages or 10 days. There was some sort of limit in as part of the deal.
Okay, so it could go on for 2 weeks then, hypothetically.
Yeah, and the ceasefire starts at 7 a.m. The first hostages are going to be released at 4 p.m. So we'll see what happens during those 9 hours.
Yeah, but I guess the thing that I just come back to time with this is how woefully unprepared they are to be kind of hostile interrogators to the Gazan side or the Hamas side, whereas they're very prepared to go do that for Israel. So the whole idea that they could be interviewing the Hamas ambassador and not really have their shit in order, let's be frank, before going in, because what he brings out instantly is, oh well, look, you guys are reporting about the 7th of October, but you don't report about all the Palestinians who are being killed in the years before, and so on and so forth, and we're occupied by Israel, and so on. And that's what's always said. And so how the interviewer didn't go knowing that's what he's going to say and have some kind of response to that, because the particular guy who interviewed him, who was from Sky, was just flummoxed, didn't really know what to say, was wanting to be in his tone hostile and interrogative, but wasn't at all. And yeah, I mean, I guess you mentioned about saying they're clueless. At best, it's cluelessness, and in all likelihood is actually a lot worse. And in a lot of instances with the British media, it is malice, I think, rather than cluelessness. But I think there's cluelessness kind of mixed in there.
I mean, just on the point of cluelessness, like we see some of that. Again, man on the street interviews are never, it's always easy to make someone look stupid, and I think most of the man on the street interviews you see are that's the whole point of them. But if you look at some of the interviews they did with people protesting here in London, there were these two girls who were asked about, Hamas's invasion of Israel, and they're like, oh, I don't think, one of them goes, I don't think Hamas did that, did they? And then the other one, like, they don't actually know. They don't know what they're there, but they don't know. And somebody else was saying, yeah, I don't really want to wipe Israel off the map, but everybody's chanting from the river to the sea, so I just play along. I mean, these people are human beings. They're adults, even the younger ones are young adults. They're responsible for their own actions, and they can't claim cluelessness.
Yes, well, and so there's a moral irresponsibility going on. I do agree about that. So cluelessness doesn't absolve them. There was on that video you were kind of mentioning. There was a video I saw on TikTok, which I know isn't a great source of news, of a guy who went around with a clipboard. This was in the States, and said to people, would you like to sign this petition to call for a peace in Israel, or to support Hamas, whatever? And people say, oh yeah, I'd love to. He says, good, well, let me just read out these terms and conditions. It's like, you would like to throw gay people off buildings, you would like to kill all the Jews and stuff like that. And then the people instantly put the pens down and act very offended. It's like, no, I couldn't support that. And it just, like, the idea that they would have signed that petition and I have no idea what they were supporting the whole time. It's it's morally criminal, what's going on there. Not literally criminal. Otherwise, Matthew would have to, get you involved. But so anything final to say on the interview, because this connects into the Mark Regev thing that I want to talk about.
Well, I think you're both right. There is a lot of cluelessness, but that I agree is only an excuse up to a point. If people are going to get involved in these issues, there's some responsibility on them to actually understand what they're actually talking about, what the issues are, and what they're actually protesting, instead of just sort of mindlessly chanting stuff they don't understand. There was a similar interview, actually. It wouldn't surprise me if it was the same guy Razi was just talking about, who was going around chanting from the river to the sea, etc. But when questioned, he couldn't actually name either the river or the sea actually, involved in the chant. He just didn't understand what they were actually talking about at all.
Yeah, and again, like if you have 4 or 5 hours on a Saturday to spare to go, block the roads and chant, you can spend that time actually learning about what it is you're protesting about, and then decide next week if you want to join. Many of them don't do that, and unfortunately, many do. Many people know exactly what it is they're supporting. That's why we saw people go out on the streets in London and many Western cities on October 7th. They went out to celebrate the atrocities. Now they're pretending the side that they're supporting are the victims, because they know that that narrative works, and is something that the media will comply with. Morgan, I don't know if we lost you or just lost your video, but
I just turned the video off because I was your guys' video was lagging for me, so I just didn't want to I wanted to make sure I wasn't lagging for you guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I was gonna see if you want to move on, or if we
should
let's do super chats.
Oh yeah, well, let's do the. Do you want to read out the super chats, and then I'll talk about Mark Regev?
Yeah, so Frank Grail, thank you for the super chat. He says there are now claims IDF hurt Israelis on October 7th. I mean, to some extent, there were such claims early on. There was mistranslation of something that a hostage who was freed said, about crossfire and so on. But yeah, look, there's any way in which the people on the side of Hamas cannot, they're aware that the truth is not their friend. So any way they can distort it, they will do so. Now, when the IDF showed up, they obviously shot at terrorists, and it could be that innocent Israelis were caught in the crossfire. I don't know that that's known, but just like the deaths of anyone in Gaza, this is 100% Hamas's responsibility. Anybody who dies on either side is Hamas's responsibility. So, but of course, the people on the side of the terrorists claim the exact opposite, like the head of the UN. They claim that it is Israel who's responsible for the barbaric acts of Islamic terrorists. Thank you, Jonathan Honig, for $19.99 US. Jason Adams with $5 says Israel matters, the actual truth. Yeah, I mean, again, like the title of this episode was kind of I don't know, tongue in cheek, considering where the way that phrase is being used in U.S. politics. But yeah, the question of the lives of Palestinians and how, to what extent they matter to Hamas, we know that they matter in the sense that the more Palestinian lives end, the better Hamas can portray their cause to their useful idiots in the West. Morgan, should I continue to rant about stuff, or do you want to move on?
I can start if you want to rant, go ahead. But I can talk about Mark Regev if you like.
I'll have future rants on different topics.
Okay. So obviously, since the war has started, we've been covering it extensively, and an awful lot of that coverage has been negative. Like we've issued some praise to some of the rhetoric coming from Western leaders when it's been strong, but of course that's always been undercut. So we've been primarily doing a lot of negative coverage. And there's one guy who I've been particularly impressed by on this, which is Mark Regev. And I kind of wanted to do this topic on him just because I wanted to single him out as someone who is very, very good at putting the Israeli side forward. So he is the kind of special advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu and has been for the last 3 years. Before that, between 2016 and 2020, he was the Israeli ambassador to the UK, which is why, I guess, on all the British news sources and podcasts and so on, he's put forward to speak for the Israeli side because he'll have experience with the UK. And he's extraordinarily impressive at putting, I think, the moral case for Israel forward. He's not perfect, but it's far better than you get kind of standardly. And also at combating the kind of the typical line that you're getting from the media, much in the same way. So the statements that he makes are very much in alignment with what we're often saying. Because in a sense, he's being sent out to bat for the Israeli government. There are some inconsistencies every now and again. So for example, he's defending the hostage deal at the moment, which we're not criticizing that. However, on the moral right of Israel to defend itself, on why it's a tragedy that Palestinians are killed, but that Israel has the right to do that, to take those actions, for example. He's very, very impressive. And so I just briefly before we went live, got a couple of his tweets, which he's been tweeting sort of multiple times a day consistently since the war broke out. And these are just some that I grabbed just from the last few days, which I sent to Daniel, which maybe we can put up on screen, which I think just show that he's far, far better than the typical person you get on this. So the one on the screen says, every civilian death is a tragedy. But to say that 11,200 Palestinian civilians have been killed is to uncritically parrot Hamas propaganda where not a single combatant is among the dead, an absurd proposition. So a lot of what he's been going on and saying is that British media sources are uncritically taking the line from Hamas representatives and just repeating it as if it's the truth. And so one of the sort of occasions where I first came across him was when there was the bombing of the hospital, and Western media sources such as the BBC reported that as coming from Israel, and then Israel was disputing that, saying, hey, we have no evidence that it's come from us. And yet Western media sources were maintaining that Israel had done it. It wasn't until a few days later that they actually had to walk a lot of that back. So one, he's very good on that. And we'll go on to the other tweets, I guess. But I want to ask just you two: have you guys seen any of it of Mark Regev speaking on the news? And what's your impression, and so on and so forth?
So I'm aware of him. I don't know that I've seen any of this. As I've mentioned on this show, I try to avoid, non-Israeli media for the very reason that what we just saw. But yeah, as far as I know, yeah, he's one of the better ones.
Yeah. And what about you, Matthew?
I have to say I'm not especially familiar with him. I think I've probably seen him interviewed at some point in the past few weeks, but he's not. I've not sort of seen a large number of interviews, I have to say.
Sure. Well, we can move on to one of the other tweets, I guess. But I think he's worth paying attention to, because I think he's especially good. And I guess part of the way I feel watching him kind of do this is a lot of the time, obviously, Western governments, their perspective on things are very different from the kind of line that you'll get from objectivists. And whilst I'm not claiming for a minute that Mark Regev is an objectivist, I guess the feeling that I get watching him going out to defend Israel so well is wishing for kind of British or American representatives to be anywhere near as good on these kind of issues. So then here we've got a tweet saying, while you may not eliminate Hamas as an idea, you can certainly destroy its capacity for violence by ending its territorial control over Gaza. So something else, this is responding to something that's been coming up in the news in the last few days, which is a skepticism about whether the IDF can actually achieve their military objective at all. And it's a fair question to a certain extent, because a lot of the Hamas leadership is residing in Qatar. So what if you go and level Gaza to the ground, then are you actually going to achieve anything at all? And just what I think you get is just a very common sense, like very rational kind of perspective from him about what the IDF military objectives should be. And then Daniel, do we have the next one? I think there's 4. Yeah, that one. So this is actually, because this line, Hamas has never cared about the lives of civilians in Gaza. That's actually a perspective which I only hear objectivists say. People seem to be talking about Hamas as if they actually have the rights and interests of civilians in Gaza in mind. And so this was just another one that I just grabbed, because this is exactly the point that we've been making on the channel for the last few weeks, that if you actually have humanitarian interests in mind, if you actually cared about the lives and the death of civilians, then you would want Hamas taken out of power. I also want, and also we'll move on to the final tweet, but part of the reason why these are on here is to provide a contrast with some of the commentary that's been made on Mark in the British media. So I mentioned before the podcast The Rest is Politics, which is hosted by Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. And they're interesting podcast hosts, but Alistair Campbell's a man of dubious morality, particularly for hosting Hamza Zumlot on their podcast. But what they issued in a podcast around about the same time was strong criticism of Mark Regev, basically saying that what he's voicing is a kind of nationalistic, pro-war line, which is kind of the way they were voicing it was that, in effect, whilst they think military action can be justified sometime, what you're seeing from Mark Regev is a kind of bloodthirsty perspective. And I think actually, if you look at these tweets, what you're seeing is actually quite a calm, rational, reasoned perspective. So the one he says here is, if Hamas has no qualms about murdering innocent people, it certainly has no hesitation whatsoever killing the truth. All its pronouncements must be met with skepticism. And this is very much the same thing that we've been saying on the channel for the last few weeks as well, that whatever kind of figures about death tolls and so on that are coming out of Hamas, we have to be very, very careful about the provenance of our source there, because it's in their interest to inflate the number, to lie, and so on and so forth. So part of the reason why I wanted to talk about that is just because I want to highlight him as someone who's doing an excellent job. The Israeli government should consider him worth his weight in gold, I think, because you don't get representatives like that for Western governments who speak anywhere near as well and defending their countries on a moral basis, and against combating the media kind of libels against them. But do you guys have anything to say? I just went on a long rant there.
I actually want to push back on a couple of points. Daniel, can you put up the second tweet? Now, again, as a spokesman for the Israeli government, this is probably as good as you can do. The problem is, Israel can eliminate Hamas. To say destroy its capacity for violence by ending its territorial control of Gaza. I mean, look, this is a good as good a spin as you can put on Israel's policy, which is to kind of get rid of Hamas and then bring in some probably hostile country or countries to or organization like the UN to control the territory. So this is again, this is what you can do with what you're working with, but what Israel really should be doing is destroying Gaza completely and ensuring and taking over the area and ensuring that Palestinian culture is a thing of the past, and doing that in the West Bank as well. And you eliminate that as an idea by military means. Let's put it that way.
So I understand what you're saying, but there's a way in which I want to push back against that, because, so for example, when Michael and I have been talking on the show in the last few days, what we've been talking about to some extent is that part of the difficulty in combating Hamas is that in destroying them, what you'll do is convince all the kind of Muslims or Arabs in the area that Israel is even more the bad guy than they already perceive them to be. And basically, so I know you might disagree, but my perspective on that is that there's no way around that you still have to do it, but you can't control what they're going to think about that. And so that whilst he's saying you might not be able to destroy Hamas as an idea, destroying their control over Gaza is, I think, probably the best that you can hope for out of this.
So the whole blowback theory, I mean, it's basically the idea that these people who, again, there are two modes there. There's the killing Israelis, killing Jews, or the planning to kill Jews. Those are the two things that the Palestinian culture engages in. And to say that the Arab countries that don't recognize Israel's right to exist, want to see Israel wiped off the map, that they might hate us more. No, they will fear Israel if Israel actually shows that it is willing to destroy its enemies. And the likelihood of any other actors in the Middle East getting involved is much higher now than it will be a week from now if Gaza is flattened, if southern Lebanon is flattened, if there's a significant military operation in the West Bank, and there's some heavy bombing of the Houthis in Yemen, at the very least, not to mention something against Iran. No, I think if Israel goes all out and says, look, the ideology that is at the root of the desire to wipe the Jews off the map, that ideology has come to an end, then no, I don't think Israel is at greater risk. I think Israel is at, as I said in an episode we did about a month ago when I presented my peace plan, I think I still think peace in the Middle East is achievable, but it's achievable by eliminating Palestinian culture and making Israel's enemies regret that they are Israel's enemies.
Well, there's a way in which I don't disagree with some of what you're saying, but at least the way I'm interpreting it is that the thing which is motivating the hostility to Israel is effectively is anti-Semitism, is that its neighbors all would like to see it eradicated because they hate them because they're Jewish, right? And Israel can't do an awful lot about that. Now they can destroy Hamas, which is destroying an awful lot of anti-Semites. Yeah, great, very good. But at least in this conflict right here, I think the best thing that they can achieve is removing Hamas's control over the Gaza Strip. About the West Bank, I don't know how they deal with that, because probably if they try and launch an attack against the Palestinian Authority there, I think the international community would really come down hard on them about that. So that's why I thought his comments in that tweet were pretty good.
So I know Matthew has been waiting to say something for a while. I'll just very quickly say that, we did an episode on October 9th, why Israel can't win, and people were upset with me. And again, the reason Israel can't win isn't military. Militarily, Israel can win relatively easily. The reason Israel can't win is because of this thinking of we need to protect civilians on the enemy's side. We need to appease the international community who already hates us and will hate us as long as we exist. Yeah, by the time we did that episode on October 9th, there should have been no Hamas, and there should have been a significant military operation in the West Bank. By the way, there are daily incidents in the West Bank. The IDF is present. They are killing and capturing some terrorists, but it's insufficient. It's not enough. The next big attack is coming. It's coming when they decide that it's time. So I don't think Israel should sit around and wait. I know maybe it's good for PR, for Israel to suffer another attack. But that's not what government should do. Government should not be in the PR business. It should be in the defending its citizens' business. And I hope Israel magically turns around and starts to do that now.
Matthew, do you want to go, just because Razi and I had a back and forth there?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm obviously not knowing much about Mark Regev up until now. Those tweets do look quite impressive. I completely agree there. In terms of what he says about Gaza being better off without Hamas, well, I completely agree with that. What I would say is I am not sure of the extent to which the people in Gaza actually share that sentiment. Certainly, there were a lot of people actually cheering on or celebrating the initial attack by Hamas when it should have been obvious what was going to happen, that there would be blowback from Israel. At the same time, it is probably worth remembering that there hasn't been an election in Gaza in, I think, something like close to 20 years. I think it was a couple of years after Israel pulled the military out and Hamas took over, and there hasn't been an election there since. I suspect if there is any opposition there, that it is very brutally suppressed. So really, we can't say for sure how all the people in Gaza actually feel about Hamas.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to go, Reza. It's always, I think, difficult to measure opposition in effectively totalitarian states. But a couple of things. One, of course, Hamas won that election, I think, in a landslide, so that you could maybe take that as a measure. I don't know to what extent you could actually test the legitimacy of the votes, but I don't think there's much dispute that they had the support of the populace. Also, there's an interesting YouTube channel, this guy who goes around Israel and Gaza and asks Israelis and Arabs the same questions. And when he goes around Gaza, and again, this is how you have to take to what degree this is reliable, but whenever he's asking Israelis about whether they hate the Palestinians, it probably is about an 80-90% kind of response where it's no, we don't hate them, we just like the fighting to cease. And then 10% you do get people who say they hate them. But then when he's in Palestine, what he gets is it's much just flipped. It's about 80% people saying that they wouldn't want Israelis to be allowed to be tourists into Gaza. They would attack them if they saw them, and so on and so forth. So I think there is a strong public support for at least that kind of idea. I mean, public support for political institutions can wax and wane even if they don't fully disagree with the ideas. But I think there probably is general public support for Hamas in Gaza. But Razi, you go ahead.
Yeah, so that was the other thing I had an issue with. Daniel, can you bring up that tweet as well, the third one? Yeah, there's no, there are no elections in Gaza, but there are, you know, as Matthew mentioned, we saw the Palestinians in Gaza go out into the streets to celebrate on October 7th. We saw any car that arrived with, whether it was hostages or bodies of Israelis who were killed. The Palestinian people went out and celebrated. It's actually, we've spoken about the lynch in Ramallah in 2000. I recommend that people go back and look at that. There's some video which is going to be disturbing, but something similar happened. Two reserve soldiers took a wrong turn somewhere, ended up in the Palestinian city of Ramallah, which is considered like one of the more civilized, and maybe is one of the more civilized areas there. And the people just the soldiers were arrested. The people took over the police station, the Palestinian people, lynched the two soldiers to death, and again celebrated. So this is, yeah, the Palestinian people are Hamas in spirit. Those of them who are not actually Hamas, they're in Gaza. There's another organization that's not as big, but Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which was involved in October 7th. Some of the hostages are held by them. So yeah, I think it's this tweet is again, if you're a spokesperson for the Israeli government, you have to say that kind of stuff. But I'm sure he knows that is not the truth. The truth is Hamas is a true representative of the Palestinian people.
I didn't take him as saying that Hamas wasn't representative, though. He was saying that Hamas doesn't care about the lives of civilians, which I think is true, surely.
That's true. I mean, in a sense, they do care about him in the sense that the ending of the lives of Palestinians is good for them. That this is something that they use, for propaganda. So, yeah, but again, the Palestinian people know this and they go along with it. So,
yeah, no, for sure. And it's even though it's hard to gauge, I think generally the impression that I think you always get is that they have the support here. There was a lot of reporting about. There was reporting about when that phone call was leaked. I don't know if you guys heard it, of the guy who called home to brag to his parents that he had killed Jews, and his parents are not horrified about what he's bragging to them about. They're really quite happy. And there was another article very similar of the mother of one of the fighters talking about how proud she was of her son. And whilst it can be tough, I think, from the outside to infer or to make an induction about the general populace, I think generally the evidence points to the populace supporting Hamas. Anything final else to say, guys?
I'd say that it's not a mistake that we don't hear those stories as much as we when you see Palestinians on British media, they're usually crying next to the ruins of a building or something like that. You don't really see them when they're telling the truth and celebrating their culture and the way their culture was celebrated on October 7th. And yeah, I think this is something that we will continue to talk about because this is the media in the country that we're in. There is a super chat from Enric. He says, it's not primarily anti-Semitism that is hated in the region, it's Western culture. That's why bin Laden attacked America. So yeah, it's not primarily Jews. No, yeah, Jews represent everything that is that is offensive to people who take I think any religion, but certainly Islam, seriously. And yeah, I think the whole bin Laden thing, which I have followed, is telling where we're going. I mean, I thought it was bad, after 9/11, and now it's just it's next level.
Yeah. Well, the fact that although some of the videos that were responding to the Letter to America thing were kind of clickbaity, the degree to which what he was saying in that letter dovetails essentially with the education that people get at university about post-colonialism is shocking, and it should really cause us to evaluate people like supporting universities, like why people who are giving money to universities should really consider that they're funding their own destruction, because the ideas that are pumped out are ideas which Osama bin Laden would agree with, which is really terrible. I put my video back on. I hope it doesn't lag out. Anything final to say, Matthew, before we wrap up? You're on mute, I think.
Sorry, I don't think I've got anything to add, to be honest.
Sure.
There was a question in the chat. Frank asked, can ARCUK do a show about the Napoleon movie?
I guess we can. It's up to you, Razzie, I guess.
As long as I don't have to be on that show, why not?
I'm going to see it this time, so we can do it.
If it means I have to go see a movie, then sorry.
You don't like to watch movies?
I'm definitely well. I watch some movies, but no, I'm not a movie person, and I'm definitely not a movie in the cinema person. So
I'm going to go watch it on Saturday, so maybe we could do it next week sometime. Cool. All right, guys.
Yeah, or when we return to non-war stuff, which by the way is coming soon. And now when we do return to non-war stuff, we're still going to do a lot of coverage of the war. I think that's, as we transition back into our regular programming, still the majority of what we do will be about the war. And of course, when things require us to, go back fully to talk about the war, we'll do that as well. I don't think we have 100% confirmation for tomorrow's episode of the Daily Objective, but if it is what I hope it'll be, then I will be interviewing somebody who Morgan and Matthew, you both know who that is. Like you'll recognize the name without having to Google it. I think some of our American audience will have to Google, but yeah. And then on Saturday, I will be interviewing, that is confirmed. Saturday, I will be interviewing David Deutsch, who is a well-known intellectual in the UK, and he is originally, I believe he was born in Israel. No, not your own, Frank. Nobody here has to Google your own. None of our viewers anywhere. No, this is somebody who's well known in the UK. Well, both of them are well known in the UK. Saturday is confirmed with David Deutsch, and I don't want to say the name for tomorrow until it's 100%.
Well, the person who won't be named once dated my religious studies teacher at school. So there you go. Interesting factoid for everyone.
Well, now people can just research and they'll know who it is.
Yeah, there you go. Cool. Brilliant. So we'll see everyone tomorrow, I guess.
Yep. See you tomorrow.